For decades, India bought weapons from everyone. Russia, America, France, Israel, Britain, anyone who was willing to sell, and India paid. India paid with money. India paid with dignity. And India paid with something far more dangerous, strategic dependency. Because when you rely on another country's weapons to defend your own soil, you don't just borrow their technology, you borrow their permission, you borrow their goodwill. And the moment that goodwill runs dry, your soldiers stand on a battlefield with weapons they cannot fix, cannot upgrade, and cannot replace without making a phone call to a foreign capital. That was India's reality for most of the 20th century. But something changed. India stopped asking for permission. And today, on the other side of that silence, stands a country with an aircraft carrier built in its own shipyard, a helicopter that fights where no other machine in the world can survive, a missile that travels faster than a rifle bullet, a fighter jet built in its own factory, a tank that defeated Russia's best in a head-to-head trial, and an air defense network so layered and so lethal that launching an attack against India has effectively become a death sentence. And this documentary is going to take you through all six of them, not with the cold language of a defense briefing, but with the honesty and emotion this story deserves. And before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to genuinely thank those of you who've recently become members of the channel. Your support really means a lot and helps keep this going in the best way. If you're enjoying the content, consider subscribing. And if you feel like going a step further, joining as a member is always appreciated. Either way, I'm just glad you're here. Picture the year 2009. India announces to the world that it plans to build its own aircraft carrier, from scratch, in its own shipyard, with its own engineers. The international reaction was not skepticism, it was laughter. The sentiment was almost universal. This was a country that had spent years struggling to produce a reliable fighter jet. How on earth was it going to build a floating military fortress that weighs 45,000 tons, carries dozens of aircraft, houses thousands of systems, and must operate in the middle of an ocean, alone, unsupported, and under fire? The answer came in August of 2022. INS Vikrant sailed out of the Cochin shipyard, and suddenly nobody was laughing anymore. Here is what nobody had calculated. India had built a carrier that is genuinely competitive with the finest warships on the planet, at a fraction of the cost. INS Vikrant carries up to 40 aircraft on its flight deck. It reaches a speed of 28 knots. America's Nimitz-class carriers push past 30. Britain's Queen Elizabeth hits 25. Vikrant sits comfortably between the two, slower than America's fastest, faster than Britain's. But here is where the comparison becomes genuinely extraordinary. Vikrant can travel 7,500 nautical miles without stopping to refuel. That is almost identical to the operational range of America's nuclear-powered carriers, ships that don't need fuel in the conventional sense. And Vikrant achieves that range without a nuclear reactor, without the astronomical cost, without the regulatory complexity, without the decades of nuclear engineering that only a handful of nations on Earth possess, and the crew. Vikrant operates with approximately 1,400 people, less than a third of what America needs for a comparable mission. That is not just an operational achievement. That is an engineering revolution in how a carrier is designed, automated, and managed. But perhaps the most stunning number in this entire story is the cost. The Gerald R. Ford, America's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, cost more than $12 billion. Britain's Queen Elizabeth cost $7.6 billion. India's INS Vikrant, a ship that can operate alongside both, that matches their range, that flies comparable aircraft, that is combat-ready in every meaningful sense, cost $2.4 billion. One-fifth the cost, one-fifth. And then India did something that shocked even the countries that build nuclear carriers. India revealed that Vikrant was not sailing alone. It was sailing alongside INS Vikramaditya, India's existing carrier, modified and upgraded. Together, these two ships form a dual carrier battle group. The club of nations that can deploy two carrier battle groups at the same time has exactly three members: the United States, China, and India. When both Indian carrier groups sail together, they command 70 combat aircraft across a vast stretch of open ocean. That combined formation controls every vessel, every aircraft, every submarine in an enormous operational area. And the geography matters here perhaps more than anything else. The Indian Ocean is not just water. It carries 70% of the world's maritime trade, oil, gas, container ships. Every vital artery of the global economy passes through that water. And India, with two carrier battle groups, can lock it down. India had secured the seas, but sea control means nothing if the skies above it belong to someone else. There is a place in the world that military planners rarely talk about in public because the reality of fighting there is almost too brutal to describe in comfortable language. Siachen Glacier, 21,300 feet above sea level. The air is so thin that breathing feels like inhaling through a damp cloth. Temperatures drop to 60 degrees below zero. The wind does not blow at attacks. Helicopters that function perfectly at sea level become unreliable and dangerous at these altitudes. Engines gasp for oxygen they cannot find. Rotors struggle to generate lift in air, so thin it barely qualifies as air. This is where India's soldiers live. This is where India's borders exist. And in 2019, the Indian Army acknowledged a problem that had existed for years. They needed an attack helicopter that could actually operate up there. Not survive up there. Operate. Fight up there. So they looked at what the world had to offer. America offered the Apache AH-64. The Apache is perhaps the most famous and most feared attack helicopter in history. It is battle-tested in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a dozen other conflicts. Armed with Hellfire missiles, equipped with extraordinary sensors, the most powerful attack helicopter America has ever built. But the Apache has a service ceiling and maximum altitude at which it can reliably function of approximately 15,000 feet. Siachen sits at 21,300. At that altitude, an Apache does not become a weapon. It becomes a very expensive problem. The thin air robs it of power, of lift, of control. It cannot carry a meaningful weapons load at those heights. In Afghanistan, where American pilots routinely operated at 12,500 feet, they required special performance planning for every single flight just to manage the demands of altitude. And Siachen is nearly 9,000 feet higher than that. Russia's Mi-28 helicopter weighs 11.5 tons and maxes out at around 12,000 feet. China's Z-10 reaches approximately 13,000 feet under optimal conditions. Every major attack helicopter from every major military power on Earth falls apart long before it reaches the altitude where India's soldiers need air support. And then there is the HAL Prachan, built in Bangalore, designed specifically for this exact problem. A light combat helicopter that weighs 5.8 tons, almost half the weight of an Apache, and that can operate, fight, land, take off, and engage targets at 21,300 feet above sea level. In 2022, the Prachan became the first attack helicopter in history to land at Siachen Glacier during operational trials. The first in history, not Indian history, not Asian history. World history. It flies on twin Shakti engines developed jointly with France that generate enough power to function in the oxygen-starved thin air of the high Himalayas. Its 20-millimeter turret gun fires 800 rounds per minute with accuracy out to 2 kilometers. And while the Apache's 30-millimeter chain gun delivers more raw firepower in terms of caliber, in the mountains where weight is the enemy of flight, Prachan's lighter, leaner design is not a compromise, it is the precise advantage that makes it dominant. Each Apache costs approximately 800 crores by the time it reaches Indian inventory. Each Prachan costs 438 crores. And every component of the Prachan can be manufactured, maintained, and upgraded inside India without calling any foreign government, without waiting for export approval, without depending on a supply chain that passes through another country's political calculations. India approved 156 Prachans for deployment. By 2025, these helicopters began patrolling the entire Himalayan frontier from Ladakh in the west to Arunachal Pradesh in the east. The Apache is a world-class helicopter, but in the world's highest battlefield, there is only one helicopter that can actually dominate, and it is made in Bangalore. BrahMos, the missile that leaves no time to think. In 1998, India and Russia began a conversation about a missile, a weapon that would combine Russian ramjet engine technology with Indian guidance systems, Indian navigation, and Indian manufacturing, a weapon that would fly faster than anything comparable in the world. The Americans were not particularly worried. At the time, the idea of India producing a world-class precision weapon seemed, to most observers, more aspiration than reality. India had a long history of ambitious weapons programs that stretched out over decades, ran massively over budget, and delivered results that were sometimes impressive but often disappointing. There was no particular reason to believe this would be different. Then BrahMos flew, and then it kept flying. BrahMos travels at Mach 2.8, that is 2.8 times the speed of sound. To understand what that actually means in a battlefield context, consider this comparison. America's most famous cruise missile, the Tomahawk, is legendary. It has been used in conflicts across the Middle East. It carries a powerful warhead, it is accurate and reliable, and it flies at Mach 0.74. BrahMos flies at nearly 4 times the speed of a Tomahawk. When a radar system detects BrahMos, the missile has approximately 30 seconds before it reaches its target. The average air defense system requires between 45 and 60 seconds to detect a threat, classify it, track it, lock onto it, calculate a firing solution, and launch an interceptor. The math is brutally simple. By the time a defense system finishes deciding what to do about BrahMos, BrahMos has already arrived. But speed is only part of the story. The missile weighs 3 tons and carries a 300-kilogram warhead with a range of 450 kilometers. More than that, at Mach 2.8, BrahMos carries an almost incomprehensible amount of kinetic energy. Even if its warhead were entirely removed, the sheer physical impact of 3 tons of metal moving at nearly 3 kilometers per second would be enough to destroy most targets. India has deployed BrahMos in every conceivable domain. Land-based launchers can fire it from fortified positions. Naval ships carry it, submarines can launch it, and Sukhoi 30 MKI fighter jets can carry it at altitude, dramatically extending its effective range before it even fires its own engine. This is what military strategists call multi-domain strike capability. The ability to hit the same target with the same devastating weapon, launched from land, sea, air, or underwater, depending entirely on which platform is most advantageous at that moment. And the world noticed. In 2022, the Philippines, a country that already operates American, European, and Chinese weapon systems, signed a $375 million deal for BrahMos. Indonesia began negotiating a similar purchase. These are not nations that buy weapons out of charity. They buy weapons because those weapons work. And when they wanted the finest cruise missile available on the global market, they did not call Washington. They did not call Beijing. They called New Delhi. Today, 65% of BrahMos components are manufactured in India. What began as a collaboration is now increasingly an Indian product with a Russian heritage. Russia gets a capable missile. India gets the world's fastest operational cruise missile and a growing, credible, lucrative defense export business. The weapon the world dismissed is now the weapon the world wants to buy. Tejas, the fighter jet India was told it could never build. In 1983, India announced that it would build its own fighter jet. There were years when the program seemed entirely lost, when critics inside and outside India openly questioned whether it would ever produce anything flyable, let alone anything combat-worthy. And then Hindustan Aeronautics Limited announced a contract worth over 1.13 lakh crore rupees to produce 180 Tejas fighters for the Indian Air Force. Manufactured in Bangalore, in India, the country that couldn't build a fighter jet built an entire fighter jet production line. The Tejas is a lightweight, single-engine fighter capable of reaching Mach 1.8, nearly twice the speed of sound. It carries Israeli-developed radar systems capable of tracking enemy aircraft from 100 kilometers away. It fires the Astra missile built in India, capable of engaging targets beyond visual range. It delivers precision-guided munitions that can destroy tanks and reinforce bunkers. It is agile, fast, and ferociously competitive in close-range aerial combat. Now consider its most direct adversary in the regional context. Pakistan's JF-17 Thunder was built in direct collaboration with China for one explicit purpose: to match and counter India. It was designed from the ground up as India's aerial opponent. And when Tejas meets a JF-17, In a simulated engagement, what the data shows is striking. The Tejas outturns it. The Tejas outclimbs it. The Tejas pulls high-gravity maneuvers in tight turns that would overwhelm the JF-17's ability to track and respond. In a dogfight, the closest, most brutal form of aerial combat agility is survival. And Tejas dances around the JF-17 the way a trained athlete moves around someone who has only ever read about sport. But perhaps the most important comparison is not capability, it is cost. Each Tejas costs 309 crores. An American F-16, the benchmark lightweight fighter of the past 4 decades, costs approximately 540 crores by the time it enters Indian inventory. A French Rafale, India's current premium fighter, costs 750 crores. For the price of one Rafale, India can produce 2.5 Tejas fighters that can hold their own in combat against every regional opponent India actually faces. And then there is the question of sovereignty. Pakistan's JF-17 requires Chinese and Russian approval and support for every upgrade, every modification, every repair beyond a certain complexity. That means Pakistan's ability to fight with that jet depends not just on Pakistan's military, it depends on Beijing's mood, on Moscow's priorities, on decisions made in foreign capitals by people who have their own interests to consider. Tejas belongs to India, entirely. India arms it, upgrades it, maintains it, and improves it without asking anyone's permission. Rajasthan, 2010. The Indian Army is running comparative trials between 2 tanks in the desert heat. In one corner, the T-90, Russia's masterpiece, the backbone of India's armored corps, battle-tested in conflicts across multiple continents, a tank with a global reputation built over decades. Defense experts watching these trials expected the T-90 to dominate. The smart money, all of it, was on the Russian machine. The trial results arrived. The Indian tank won. The Indian tank demonstrated superior targeting accuracy, better armor protection, faster acquisition of moving targets, and higher survivability for the crew inside. In the conditions of the Rajasthan desert, the exact terrain where any India-Pakistan armor conflict would actually occur, the home-built machine outperformed the foreign legend. This is the Arjun Mk-1A. It weighs 68 tons, nearly 20 tons heavier than the T-90. That weight is not a liability, it is protection. The Arjun carries a 120mm rifled gun capable of penetrating any tank armor in the South Asian theater. Its fire control system can acquire, track, and engage multiple moving targets simultaneously, even while the Arjun itself is moving at 60 kilometers per hour across broken desert ground. The armor is what truly separates it. India developed the Kanchan composite, a layered material combining steel, ceramic, and classified components that achieves protection equivalent to 1,000 millimeters of rolled steel. To put that in context, most modern tank rounds struggle against protection at that level. The Arjun can take a direct hit from rounds that would destroy most of its competitors. The cost sits at approximately 37 crores per unit compared to 35 crores for a T-90, a marginal difference. But for that marginal difference, India receives a tank specifically engineered for the desert conditions where it will actually fight, with components that can be produced and maintained domestically, with an upgrade path controlled entirely by Indian engineers. India ordered 118 Arjun Mk-1A tanks, enough to fully equip 2 armored regiments, the units that would lead any ground assault or armor defense in the western sector. It may represent India's final order for heavy tanks as the military pivots toward faster, lighter platforms suited for mobile warfare. But in the desert, against enemy armor, nothing in the region hits harder or survives longer. India had now covered 3 of the 4 critical domains of modern warfare: sea, air, land. The 4th domain, the invisible one, was still waiting: the integrated air defense shield. The system that made attacking India suicidal, February 2019. The skies over northern India are tense. Following the Balakot incident, Pakistan launches retaliatory airstrikes. The response is immediate. Indian air defense systems activate. Pakistani aircraft are tracked, engaged, and forced to retreat. But this confrontation, watched by military analysts worldwide, exposed something uncomfortable about India's defensive reality at the time. Both sides were still fighting primarily with other people's weapons. Pakistan flew American F-16S and Chinese JF-17S. India responded with Russian Sukhoi 30 MKIS and aging MiG-21S. Aircraft from a different era, still flying because alternatives had not yet fully arrived. Wing Commander Abhinandan's MiG-21 was shot down. Pakistan's F-16 fired missiles and retreated into their own airspace. The engagement was inconclusive. 6 years later, everything had changed. May 2025, Operation Sindoor, India launched coordinated BrahMos strikes targeting terrorist infrastructure inside Pakistan. The strikes were precise. They were devastating. And when Pakistan attempted to retaliate, launching drone swarms and guided rocket systems toward Indian territory, they encountered something that had not existed 6 years earlier: the world's first operationally integrated, multi-layered national air defense network. At its core is the S-400 Triumph system. India operates 5 batteries, each worth approximately 7,000 crores. Each S-400 battery can simultaneously track 160 targets in the air and engage 72 of them at the same time, using different missile types depending on the nature of each threat. It can detect and engage aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at distances of up to 400 kilometers. But the S-400 alone, formidable as it is only the outer ring of what India built. Indian engineers connected the S-400 to the domestically developed Akash air defense system, a network costing approximately 1,400 crores per battery, capable of engaging threats at distances of 45 to 70 kilometers. Independent testing has shown the Akash achieving an intercept success rate of approximately 88%. Together, these two systems create something that no single system achieves alone. The S-400 handles threats at extreme range, 400 kilometers out. By the time anything that survives that first layer reaches 70 kilometers, the Akash batteries are already tracking it. Anything that somehow survives the Akash at medium range faces short-range point defense systems at the final barrier. The protection is not a wall. It is a gauntlet, layer after layer after layer of overlapping, complementary systems that leave no gaps, no corridors, no blind spots. When Pakistan's drone swarms and guided rockets came in, they were intercepted, not some of them, essentially all of them. Not a single S-400 unit was hit, not a single critical facility. Pakistani claims of successful strikes were not supported by evidence on the ground. And while defending its skies, India was simultaneously executing the offensive response. 15 BrahMos missiles, launched from Sukhoi 30 MKY jets, struck Pakistani air bases with precision that systematically dismantled Pakistan's own air defense infrastructure. In the space of hours, India had demonstrated something that no regional military had previously shown in an actual conflict: the ability to defend every inch of territory simultaneously while conducting precision offensive operations hundreds of kilometers away. Chinese and Pakistani jets can no longer approach Indian airspace without being detected 400 kilometers from the border. They cannot sneak through because there is no through to sneak through. They face intercept waves starting at extreme range and continuing all the way down to the surface. An air attack against India has effectively become a mathematical exercise in absorbing unacceptable losses before a single bomb falls on Indian soil. Attacking India by air has become a suicide mission, and the world noticed that too. From buyer to builder. The transformation the world missed each of these systems is impressive on its own. But what India has built is far more significant: an integrated, self-reliant defense ecosystem. In 2014, India exported 686 crore rupees in defense equipment. By 2024 to 25, that figure reached 23,622 crore rupees, a 34 times increase in a decade. Today, over 80 countries use Indian defense systems. From Armenia's use of Pinaka in combat to the Philippines operating BrahMos alongside Western systems, India is now a trusted global supplier. At home, indigenization has surged from approximately 30 to 35% in 2014 to approximately 65% in 2024. Critical components, electronics, propulsion, guidance, are now built domestically. This shift enables true operational sovereignty, the ability to fight, maintain, and upgrade systems without relying on foreign approvals or supply chains. Integration is the real breakthrough. Systems like BrahMos, Tejas, Akash, S-400, and naval and satellite networks now operate as a unified whole. This isn't just a collection of weapons. It's a connected, self-sustaining defense network. Unlike imported solutions adapted to local needs, India's systems are built specifically for its terrain and threats, from Himalayan warfare to maritime dominance. This is more than self-reliance. It's a strategic advantage. The world spent decades asking whether India could build weapons capable of challenging the greatest military powers on Earth. Perhaps it is time to ask a different question. Is the world ready for an India that already has?